Do you like books? I mean, really, really like books? Then you're in the right place. Each week, your host, Sam Hankin, interviews the best of today's top-selling authors and the up-and-coming superstars of modern literature. This is The Avid Reader. Here is your host, Sam Hankin.
Hi, today our guest is Genevieve Gornichec, whose novel is The Witch's Heart, released in February by Ace. This is Genevieve's debut as a novelist and tells from a different perspective what we may know from high school or college or Neil Gaiman or Marvel about Norse mythology. We all know Odin, Thor, Loki, and perhaps we know a little bit from the movies or from high school about Ragnarok and Bifrost, the Rainbow Bridge of the Gods. But before we begin to talk a little about them, we need to talk about the gods from a different perspective, that of Angrboda, a witch and a woman who is our protagonist in this story, and from whom we learn more about gods and giants and the beginning of all and the end of all than we have ever gleaned in the past. So one of the first things that Neil Gaiman reminds us of is that Loki was not Thor's brother, but was rather a blood brother with Odin. So we were just kind of subject to the whims of Stan Lee, who is kind of a hero to me, just as is J.K. Rowling, because she introduced us to so much and pushed us willingly into learning more about our world and its mythology, just as Tolkien did. And Genevieve does the same. After reading this book and periodically going down the rabbit hole of Google and YouTube, I learned a lot and expect to learn a lot more about this fascinating and, yes, mythological version of our world, our universe. So thanks, Genevieve, and welcome.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
So, as I said before we started, I know you get this question a lot, but since I'm in a bookshop and everyone always says you can't judge a book by its cover, but every single person who comes into my bookshop does exactly that. So the cover is really cool. And just go back, I know you've done it before, but just go back a little bit about the cover and how it came to be.
So I got really lucky, I think, with both of my covers. The US one was the first one I saw, and I was allowed some input on it as far as, if I felt really strongly one way or another about anything. But from the get-go, there was a couple things that I didn't want to see on the cover. So I started with that because I thought, I have no idea what I want it to look like, but I know what I don't want it to look like. So that was a great starting point, and they just kind of took it and ran with it, and it just turned out so great.
Yeah, and I love fonts, and it's a great font, right?
Yeah, the title, The Witch's Heart, on the US edition is hand lettered.
Oh, really?
Yeah, so Adam Auerbach is I hope I'm pronouncing that right, but he's the cover designer who did it at Penguin Random House. And the first couple like fonts that he did were great, but I was like, there's like, I have this vision in my head. And so I found actually a medieval Icelandic manuscript and sent over a couple like pictures of it. And he actually like took that in consideration and like used that for The Witch's Heart, the title. So it's just like the coolest thing.
I know.
I got so lucky.
Fonts are such an art, and I always get upset when I try to get someone to hand letter because it's a lot of work. I mean,
absolutely,
definitely a lot of people don't realize.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing about our protagonist is on the cover, and I'm going to jump around a lot, I do.
It's totally fine.
On the cover, she looks absolutely beautiful. The profile is beautiful, but then when you read about her, and even a little bit in what you talk about her, she's not necessarily portrayed in the myths that way. And I tried, as I was reading, to create a picture of her and Scotty. Is it Skady?
Scotty, yeah.
Scotty. I tried to create a picture of both of them, and without any spoilers, they have a very complicated relationship. Mm-hmm. And so, in your head, how did you envision both? Because I kept going back and forth as to what, especially she being a warrior.
Right. That's a great question. So the myths actually don't, like the Eddas, the source materials, from 13th century Iceland that really give us most of what we know about Norse mythology, don't tell us a whole lot about the appearances of the gods. We get like a couple tidbits here and there. So I got to really just use my imagination. Angrboda, I picture being like having, despite the cover, the beautiful cover, I picture having very straight hair and being like just very plain. And whereas Scotty is more like tall and muscular and has like these two long braids. And so that's kind of how I picture both of them. But I didn't add a lot of descriptions. I think I mentioned like I'll pepper in a couple things into the book, but a lot of people going in, I knew had their own visions of what they thought the gods looked like, maybe based on like their own personal interpretations. So I didn't want to really like drive mine home, because honestly, you can picture any of them however you'd like.
Yeah, and the thing about it is that of course what we don't know, but you intimate, is when you have a certain feeling towards a certain person, you're the person who interprets whether that's beauty or not. You know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people, a lot of people I heard said, have said things like, well, why doesn't Loki have red hair? Loki's supposed to have red hair. Well, it never says that he has red hair in the sources, but a lot of people picture him that way. Just like a lot of people pictured him as Marvel's Loki from the movies, which is fine too, and his new TV show. But so it's
Oh, yeah.
honestly, it's not that important to me that people subscribe to my interpretations of how they look. As long as you enjoy the story.
The only one that's like, Thor in the books, he does have, maybe this red beard, maybe, and he's a complete asshole. Whereas he's not in the Hemsworth version of him.
Right.
And, doesn't have the same kind of personality. He's just kind of like ready to use the hammer at any time on anybody.
Right.
And that's the other thing, again, jumping around. He does, again, without spoilers, did I say hammer? He uses the hammer in this book in a way that is totally cruel.
Mm-hmm.
And he uses it in two different specific situations.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, I guess I'll just ask it this way. Talk a little bit about the family, Angrboda and Loki's family, and how that came about, because it's a big part of Norse mythology, which before I did all this stuff, I didn't know.
Yeah, so in the mythology, we're told that Loki has 3 children with the giantess Angrboda, and the only time we really hear about the 3 kids together is when we are told that, Loki had these kids. Angrboda is just mentioned by name once in that particular source, the Prose Edda. And then we're told that the gods learn that great mischief and evil will arise from these children. So they go and take them away and place them where they believe that they'll do the least harm. Whether or not they're accidentally fulfilling Ragnarok, I feel like is up for debate, because you really kind of have to wonder, like, if they were left alone, if things maybe would have been different.
Yeah, and that's the thing about the entire book, is that it's interesting, even in our lives, how you may know what the result is, but you have either enough courage or resolve to go through what you have to go through, knowing that the result is, like the ride of this, like Gallipoli or something like that, where you know what's going to happen when you get out of the trench and you start running, right, but you still do it anyway. And there's Absolutely. A lot of that with the mythology.
Oh, for sure. Yep.
And a lot of it is, it seems like it's because they have this feeling in the back of their heads that it's not necessarily over. Mm-hmm. Talk a little bit about that, how Angrboda, she's been here from the beginning, she'll be here at the end, and then maybe a little bit each way.
Yeah, I kind of, that was all my personal interpretation of her. She is only mentioned once in each of the 2 sources that we have, but I kind of combined her with these other characters and tried to build out her story from beginning to end, because we have Gullveig, who is this the witch at the beginning, who's this like primordial being that shows up in Asgard at the beginning of time, and we have no idea who she is. A lot of the evidence points to Freya, and that's like, a lot of people believe that she's Freya, and that's totally valid. I just thought, like, what if I change it up a little bit? And then to the very end, with Ragnarok and everything, in Ragnarok itself, in the myth, there's kind of this continuity. Like, even after everything ends, like, a couple people will survive, and a couple of the gods will survive, and the world will begin anew. So I think it stands to reason that there's little bits of the gods left in the world too afterwards as well.
Yeah, and I guess that, well, I'll get to the 9 realms, but talk a little bit about, okay, we can skip the eight-legged horse.
Yeah.
We can just skip that. And then talk a little bit about their children, Fenrir, Jormungand, and Hel, and what they were like and what purposes they served within this mythology.
So the story about hell comes immediately after we're told what happens to Loki's children. Basically, we're told, hell was put in Niflheim, which is the realm of ice, and given power over life and death, and basically is almost like the custodian for the unglorious dead, the ones that don't go to Valhalla or Folkvang, which is Odin's and Freya's halls in Asgard, where the slain warriors go. So that's Hel's purpose then. And then Fenrir, we're given this very long and involved story about his binding, which in the Witch's Heart, Scotty relays at a feast near the end of the book. So, the gods essentially trick Fenrir into, letting them try out these bindings to see if he could break them. In the very last one, he just has this feeling that, they're tricking him. So he says, as a token of good faith, somebody put their hand in my mouth. And if I can't break through of the bonds, I'll bite it off. And that's what ends up happening. So he's bound. He's fated to swallow Odin whole at Ragnarok. And then, so when he breaks free, it's when Ragnarok begins. And then Jormungand the snake is thrown into the sea, and he grows so big that he encircles the world. And he is fated to kill Thor, and vice versa at Ragnarok. So from the get-go, we have like these pretty like morbid stories about these kids. So,
well, the thing that was really interesting, what you did was when the witch, she suffers her fate early on in the book, or fates periodically, right. 3 of them.
Yes.
I like the way that it's so cool, the way she doesn't remember, but she kind of remembers what she was. It's already happened even there. So there's this recursive thing, which is so cool, because she's not quite sure she remembers what she was. And she's reminded by a really nice wolf. He was my favorite character.
Yeah, mine too.
He's like sarcastic. He was sarcastic, but he was very nice and very helpful. And he made a good choice at the end too.
Absolutely, I agree.
But since you're talking about things wrapping around the world, talk a little bit about the tree that wraps around the entire 9 realms. And what are the 9 realms? You don't have to tell each one, but
Right. So the nine realms are the 9 different worlds in Norse mythology. A couple of them are up for debate, so I won't talk about them. Like, some people think that Niflheim, which is the realm of ice, and Helheim is like a separate realm. That's totally fine. It is whatever you want to think. But so the worlds are connected by Yggdrasil, the world tree, and it has roots in 3 different places, and it's the cosmic tree. Yeah, that's kind of what they believed, and the top was in Asgard.
And the beginning of, the tree doesn't have really a lineage, in the sense that it's almost like the beginning of the Bible. At the beginning was, the void.
Yeah, just kind of exists.
Except the void here is like, there's a cow in it. All of it.
Yes. Oh, I see. I didn't go that far back, because I was like, how am I supposed to explain the cosmic cow and the first giant creating, other giants out of his armpits? I'm like, we're just gonna start with Asgard. I think that's a good place to start.
And the question that follows from that is, another one that's been asked you a lot, is what is this, not desire and not obsession either, although it might be an obsession. Why and how did you become so interested in this, and why is it so compelling to you?
So I started this whole thing. I read the Norse myths as a kid, but I was way more into the Greek myths as a kid. And part of that was Percy Jackson, which, like, the first one came out when I was in high school, so I got really into those. But when I was an undergraduate in college, I took a class on Old Norse, the language. And one of the first things that we translated was the story where Loki gives birth to the horse. And after that, I was like, wow, like, I forgot how weird these stories are. And it turns out they're even weirder in the original language. So I got really, really into it. I got to take the professor who taught the Old Norse class also taught classes on the Norse myths and the Icelandic sagas. So I got to take those. And I got really interested in it. And it's like a puzzle almost. I feel like I learn something new about Norse mythology every day, which is funny because, I wrote a book about it.
Do you feel like you're a kind of steward of this, or do you think, like you've been saying before, the reader is entitled to interpret this, and like I've done is like, okay, wow, this is really cool, I'm going to start looking up more stuff about it, which is really cool for you too, I think.
Yeah,
And
absolutely. Sorry, go on.
that's right. I was just going to say, yeah, it's like you're not saying this is what happened.
Right.
You never do that in the book, but
Right.
it's like this is the story, and I'm telling it from a different perspective.
Yeah,
which you are.
absolutely. And it's been very exciting for me to hear people say that it got them more interested in Norse mythology, because that's my goal.
Exactly.
I want to foster these conversations, because this story is just my interpretation. There's a million other ways that Angerboda's story could have been told, because we're told so little. And yeah, so it's just my take and my interpretation. And yeah, I mean, if it makes you think or makes you want to learn more, like that's my goal.
Yeah, it is funny how, at the end when you acknowledge Neil Gaiman's book, which was a great book, and it's
Yeah.
always good because he has that sense of humor that he throws into it.
Mhm.
But even when first of all, and again, where did he learn about it? From Stan Lee, who's like so cool because he did so much back then, and no one really gave him credit till the last 10 years. But yeah, when he said, even the days of the week, like Thursday, I didn't know that. Is it true? I mean, is that where we got it from?
Yeah, Thursday.
Is
Yeah.
it?
Mm-hmm.
But why? Why did we rely on that? I always thought it was from the Greeks, or I didn't know where it was from.
So don't quote me on this, but I remember reading somewhere, because I've never thought about this. I was like, wow, that's cool, and then didn't think about why. But the Romans, I believe that, because they tried to connect every other god to theirs. Like, oh, like Thor, he must be the Norse version of Jupiter. Like, that's the only reasonable explanation. Like, so they ended up, because I think the Romans were the ones who had the days of the week, and they just like changed their names. I think do not quote me on that, because I don't know if that's true.
I can't help quoting you. You just said it.
I know, and it's being recorded.
Yep.
But I want to say it had something to do with that. But they do say like Saturday was like washing day, so maybe it was a Norse thing. I honestly don't remember.
It's
Sorry.
funny because it's funny because whether you're talking about the discovery of America or Vikings or all of Scandinavia, there's so much that when you're little you don't even think about it. But then it was with you the same thing. It was just something, right? It was some day, some point that brought you into this, right?
Right. Yep.
Yeah. And then did you really write it as quickly? I mean, I know it took a long time, but did you write it really quickly?
Yep. I wrote the first draft in 3 weeks. I did National Novel Writing Month. So I wrote it in 2011 for National Novel Writing Month, and then sat on it for 7 years. So.
What do you mean you sat on it? You just didn't take it out and send it to anybody or do anything?
No, I was working on several other books that have since been shelved, and I was trying to get those published, and I was like, it wasn't working out. Got a lot of rejections, which is par for the course in publishing. But finally, I was just like, it's time to pull out the witch's heart and see what happens. And the rest is history, as they say.
Yeah, and the heart is the heart in the sense of the book pivoting. And again, not spoiling things, but yeah, the heart, Loki does what he does, and she does what she does.
Right.
And I understand what she did. I'm ambivalent about why Loki, you never know why Loki does anything, especially tying his testicles to a goat. I mean, give me a break. Right. So yeah, and that's why you tend to you tend to again always compare it to the movies. But in the movies, Loki's a jokester, yes, but he's also a kind of murdering jokester. Whereas in the mythology, is he just more mischievous than evil or nasty, except for the mistletoe? Talk about the mistletoe and the brother.
Oh, geez. So that was the problem with the mythology, I think, not that like it's a problem, but it's a problem for us trying to interpret it, is that Loki kind of does a total 180 and we're not told why. He's a friend of the gods, he's one of the gods until he's not. We're given no explanation as to why he does the thing with the mistletoe. I don't know if we want to spoil it, but it is in the myths.
Yeah.
So part of the problem narratively in writing a book about the myths is trying to rationalize that especially, but some of the other things he does as well. Because the myths are so, the Eddas at least, are so straightforward about, and then this happened, and then this happened, and then this happened. And we're not really told why or how people feel. So it's kind of up to us to fill in the blanks, and the interpretations vary wildly. So again, this was just my take, kind of.
Not to sound chauvinistic, but you wrote it.
Yeah, that's true.
But doesn't doesn't she, Agrabota, doesn't she treat her relationship, her best friend is saying, don't do this. This is ridiculous. You got to get out of this. Doesn't she do what happens sometimes in real life?
Oh yeah. Yep. There was I think the day the book came out, there was an interview posted where the interviewer started off by saying like, oh, Angrboda's relationship with Loki, we've either been in that relationship or we've had a friend in that relationship, and we're Scotty and we're saying get out. So yeah, I think that's also been frustrating for readers too. I've heard a couple people say.
Yeah, I know.
But
in this culture, you don't know what you're going to say that could have repercussions.
Yeah.
But the thing about it was that there are two sides to this story. I mean, yes, he was not dependable. He could be mean. He didn't care about a lot of things, but yeah, he was he needed a lot of psychotherapy.
And Angrboda is a grown woman. She made her own choices, and those choices had repercussions. And I never intended them to be a healthy relationship or a lasting relationship. It was only a relationship in the first place because they had 3 kids. So unless I made them like triplets, which I could have done, there had to be some kind of relationship there.
Yeah, and right, the mythology is, you're not straying from the mythology there. They did have 3 kids.
Right.
Did hell come from hell? Our word hell, did it come from HEL?
Yep.
Really?
I had no idea.
Yeah, that was the first time I thought of that. Talk a little bit about the two, there's warring factions everywhere, but talk about the 2 warring factions that go to battle at the end and who they are.
Yep. So we have the gods versus the giants, or the Jotuns or Jotnar. I chose to go with giants because even though it is a mistranslation, and they're not all giant, I didn't want to just add more words that people would go, wait, what does this mean? So the gods and the giants are enemies, and they're the ones that go to war at Ragnarok.
Yeah, and as I said, the war is kind of foretold, and if you go to the time frame, what's the time frame with Odin and Agridar in the sense of, is she ancient, and he's more recent? They all can't be born the same time. And I've looked at a family tree, but I can't tell from looking at it.
Right. So in my mind, she is more ancient than he is. We're at least told about Odin's, father and great grandfather, who were giants. Make of that what you will. But I just feel like, since I at least wrote her as this like primordial being, that she is older and he is more recent, even though like he is still old.
Yeah. And they're both looking for something she already knows, but she doesn't know she knows it. He's looking for something. He's looking for it specifically.
Mm-hmm.
And it's also good the way you're not quite precise about why he's looking for what he's looking, especially if he knows what's going to happen anyway.
Yep.
But again, it's psychological. It's like a Jungian thing. We all have, I know I have it. You all have this area in your mind, where you don't really want to go, but because you're afraid to go there for one reason or another. Actually, maybe it's just me. But anyway, there's this area that, if you go down there, you're either going to free yourself or you're going to doom yourself.
Yep.
And that's what's happening to her throughout the entire book. She's fighting 100%. She's fighting it and she's succumbing to it or embracing it.
Yep.
We'll say something, we can't just stop. You got to say, you gotta say something.
Yeah, no, I think that's absolutely right. And I feel like it's not until she embraces it that she really comes to her full power. So I think there might be something to be said there about facing your fears and kind of becoming who you were really meant to be.
That's where I was trying to get you to go, is the idea that us and Midgard, we have the same kind of problems, maybe on a smaller scale. What we do is not going to have the same repercussions,
right? But
it's the same step. I mean, if you're afraid to step over a curb, even though it's easy to do, you're not going to do it. It's, it's the easiest thing to do, and it's the hardest thing to do.
Right.
And the other interesting thing about our favorite character, the she-wolf, is that she reminds her of who she is, and is kind of sarcastic again about, don't you remember,
right,
this is what you were. And that was, in my mind, not only my favorite character, but that was my favorite theme of the book, is that remembering who you are. And so, is that born like Athena, full blown from your head, or is it something that has a source?
That honestly is something that I worked up to in the book, because once I sold the book, I had to rewrite the ending twice, 3 times, because once you have a prophecy in a story, it's hard to give your characters any agency. So my first couple attempts at an ending fell a little bit flat because all the characters were just going through the motions. Like, it didn't feel like anybody had any real power. So my challenge was to figure out how to give Angerboda her power back. And that involved, having the she-wolf kind of step in and be like, hey, remember when you did these things? Remember
Yes.
how the only way to solve your problem right now was to remember who you were, or if not remember, at least, try to go back there.
Yeah, it's like, I guess, do a machina, if that's how you say it. She's there and she allows us to see what's really going on. It reminds me of, 2 things. One is, that guy I forgot who said it, but if you see a gun in the first act, it has to go off before the end,
Yep. And
you do see the gun, but it doesn't take away from anything. And the second thing is that I just read an article that just came out, I could send it to you, about whether or not we actually have free will or not. And that would be another question about the book, is does anyone in it, do any of the gods, given the context and the background that you've painted, do any of them actually have free will?
That is a question that I still ask myself when I read the myths. That's something that Loki at least struggles with in The Witch's Heart, because he wants to keep his free will. At least that's what he tells Angerboda. That's why he's like, I don't want to know about your prophecy. I don't want to know anything about it. I want to at least believe that I'm making my own choices. So that was really important to him. I think for Loki, like freedom was a big theme for him. Even though he chose to remain in Asgard, but that's Loki.
Yeah, I know. And that is Loki. I mean, he isn't really one of them, but he is.
Right.
And he doesn't really look up to them. Well, he doesn't. And yet he constantly has to go back, which is another human theme. It's exactly the same thing, whether it's addiction or whether it's a relationship or whether you feel like you belong to a country or a nationality. Isn't that cool that all these things, and I guess that's the whole key to mythology, is they all translate into what we do on a daily basis.
Yep. That's what I love about mythology. The fact that we're still talking about it and finding ways to, we must see something of ourselves still in these stories from hundreds or thousands of years ago. And I think it's absolutely fascinating.
I wonder if we'll ever create another mythology. I wonder if it's something that we'll do, or people will look back at us having made. I don't know. I've never really thought about that.
Me neither. Now
Is it-
that's some food for thought.
Yeah, because if we do create one, then it's based on what kind of actually happened. Maybe
Right.
we are as we go along, and maybe that article about free will is correct.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. I'm gonna have to think about that for a while. Wow.
Yeah, me too. It's like evolution now. I think we're kind of creating our own evolution. You know, AI and all that stuff. We're self-evolving in a sense.
Right.
So what's going on since you're essentially been locked down, which is one of the reasons you're talking to me. Otherwise, you'd be on tour. So what's happened since it came out? I guess, has your life changed?
Honestly, not really. Things have gotten a little bit busier. I'm working on my next book also, which I can't speak about because publishing right now, but hopefully I'll have some good news in the future. Um, but yeah, uh, things haven't changed a whole lot for me. I didn't go out much in the first place, but
Yeah, in one of your interviews, someone asked you, the usual question is, is there going to be a sequel, blah, blah, blah. But you didn't say no. You didn't say yes, but you didn't quite say completely a no. So I can ask it because you already said it.
okay.
So, I mean, are we going to see somebody again, do you think? Or you know the answer?
If I have my way, one day we will see some of these characters again. But it's not guaranteed because some things are sometimes out of my hands. But there's a couple characters that I would consider doing a spin-off, or that I may be already working on something that hasn't been picked up yet, but we'll see.
Yeah, it's too bad that half the authors I interview have already optioned whatever to Netflix. It's too bad you picked a topic that has an entire Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Right.
But I assume you've been approached, probably from time to time with regard to that, because it is, it's like Circe, Madeline Miller, who I've interviewed, and I know she lives here in Philadelphia.
Nice.
Yeah, it's like Circe has become so popular in great part because it's told from a different perspective.
Right. Yep.
She could be kind of a superhero.
Yeah. I love Circe. Got that one on my shelf too. Love that book.
Yeah, it really is good. And so that's the Odyssey, and then the Iliad, and I've forgotten the name of the book.
Song of Achilles.
Yeah. Song of Achilles, correct.
Circe was actually part of the reason that I decided to finally start trying to find an agent again, using the witch's heart after sitting on it for 7 years. Yeah, so it was 2018 when Circe came out. And part of the reason I had sat on the witch's heart for so long is because, well, one of the reasons is that it was so personal to me. It was my favorite thing that I'd ever written at the time. And I wasn't sure if I could handle rejection, which is, again, par for the course in publishing. So I thought, maybe safer to just keep it to myself. And then Neil Gaiman's Norse mythology came out, and I was like, okay, people are interested in Norse mythology. That's interesting. But I still don't think that they'll care about my reclusive witch hiding from the gods. And then Circe comes out in 2018. I'm like, oh.
Yeah. It's cool that, you had it. Maybe you had not a template, but a little bit of a lattice because of that book. But the key thing about it is you both do the same thing, which is, one, tell it from a woman's point of view, and two, and I'm not making a big deal out of that, but it's true. But you also, it's like you're stepping back and looking at something that normally you'd be right in the middle of. Mm-hmm. And I think that's an excellent way to approach things. And I assume you thought about that.
Yeah, definitely.
Well, if you think about, I don't really mean to make all these popular cultural references, but if you think of, say, Avatar and the home tree, it's kind of like the home tree, right?
Yeah. Gosh, it's been a while since I've seen Avatar, but
yeah, and there's supposed to be like three or four avatars, and because again of COVID, they're sitting in the can, and Disney has to decide in which order they're going to release everything because they have so much ready to go. Well, I have the whole family tree here in front of me.
Oh, that's awesome.
I know, and I've been looking at it all morning. It's a really cool one too, because it's kind of funny. But yeah, so thanks a lot for getting me started on this. And then also it's kind of going to be a pain, which I don't thank you for, because I'll spend way too much time doing it instead of what I should be doing. But yeah, it was a pleasure talking to you. And thanks so much for going through this with us. It's a great book.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. It was a pleasure. And thank you so much for having me on today.
You're welcome. Talk to you soon.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.